While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, I'm joined by the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. Check us out online, retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org. Out there on our website, lots of fantastic resources for you to buy, to read, to access, but also to be able to access past podcasts that we've recorded, as this is number 70. So you got lots of different topics we've covered about retirement and prepping for retirement. We encourage you to check out our archives. Retirement. The process of prepping for and entering into retirement, it's daunting to say the least. So many possibilities and so many ways to get it all wrong. As we've said so many times in this podcast, many retirees know what they're retiring from, but very few know what they're retiring to. We're trying to help with that. How can you make sure you're prepared for what's ahead? Bruce Bruinsma was here to help. To lend some advice as we continue our three-part series, Questions for Prepping for Retirement. Today we're going to focus on 6 questions we must answer in order to be prepared for the choices we have ahead of us in our retirement. Bruce, welcome back to iRetire4Him.
One of the things that I learned a number of years ago from one of my really special mentors. Well, all mentors are special, but this particular one, because he asked me a question. He said, Bruce, who controls the conversation? Is it the person who's asking the question, or is it the person who is speaking and pontificating and answering? And I had to think about that for a minute, and I realized that it was the question asker that really controls the conversation. And that is what was part of the driving force of always saying, what are the questions that we need to ask? And then the answers that we need to come up with. But it's the questions that will then give us the direction of where we're going to go.
You just gave away all of my secrets that now people understand I'm a control freak, because as the interviewer, I always get to ask the questions. So I take you wherever I want you to go, Bruce. Sorry. Okay, Bruce, in our retirement, we have choices we have to make. Serious choices. Our ability to decide ahead of time which way these choices will lean should help us be prepared, right?
Absolutely.
So what's the first choice question we need to ask?
One, it's both a choice and an understanding that circumstances will change your relationships. And so the first question we have, how are you going to relate to your spouse or to your partner? And we can expand that to others also, but let's just leave it with spouse or partner right at the moment. How are you going to relate to them given the change in the circumstances from that career and maybe a year or two of nothing, and then realizing that there needs to be meaning and purpose, and the relationship between you and your spouse will have changed. The circumstance will have changed. Therefore, the dialogue perhaps needs to change also. How are you going to relate to them? What's the story of the woman whose husband finished his career, and he came home, and he was home for about the first 6 months, and he asked her, he said, what do you think I ought to do? He said, anything that will get you out of the house. Our circumstance changes, and therefore our conversations change.
Yeah.
And so the priorities that we have, the language that we use, the choices that we make for topics when we talk and when we don't. For example, Judy and I, our best conversations are when we're out for a meal. Could be at Denny's or could be at Ruth Chris, but wherever it is.
Well, you talk about the spectrum there. Denny's and Ruth Chris. Okay.
That's a big picture. But in fact, we know that we need to continue to stay connected. We need to speak with each other. And the conversations we're having now versus the conversations we had 15, 20, 30 years ago are totally different. And to be aware that that's true. Also that, we're also very basically selfish. And so we want to talk about ourselves. Yet in a relationship, it's asking the questions and listening carefully, which will build the relationship. So how am I going to relate to my spouse, my partner, given the new set of circumstances is the first question.
Yeah, and it's a good one because that is, you've committed to your spouse, and that's really, we're assuming that you're still get to be married into your retirement. It's very, very important. All right, so one thing for sure is that when we get to retirement, we're going to have tons of available time. What is a good question to ask with regard to our time?
Well, I just start with a real simple one. So what am I going to do? Or what are you going to do? Or what are we going to do? It's a very simple question. But man, it has complexities all around it. It has, because we know that 85% of price followers, when we ask them, what are you going to do in retirement? They come up with the answer of some version of nothing. You're going to do nothing. You don't need a plan. You don't need direction. You don't need anything. You're going to do nothing. And so if that is the answer, then the problems that will arise because of that decision will be huge. And so what are we going to do is the question. So, maybe it is for the next 6 months, we're going to, buy a coach and we're going to travel around the country. That's fine. My next question to you, if that's your answer, is while you're doing that, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, what are you going to do? But then what are you going to do? Then you have to ask that next question. If we know what we're going to do, then we have to decide what.
Where are you going to do it? Is that going to be around the country? Is that going to be in our backyard? Is that going to be around the world? And while we're doing that, is there anything that God will call us to do to begin to find or be a part of a ministry that can evolve out of that nothingness or the decisions of what we're going to do and where we're going to do it? For example, if where I'm going to do it is going to be in Africa, there's a lot of ministry opportunities in Africa, while in fact we're discovering the beauties of Mount Kilimanjaro, while we're discovering the wonderful variety of the animals that God created. There is ministry for us to do. So you can start to move from nothing to meaning even while you're answering those questions.
All right, so our first three questions, as we look at the choices we need to make, are how are you going to relate to your spouse or partner? What are you going to do with your time? And where are you going to do it? When we come back in the third segment, we're going to ask the second three questions as we look at the choices we need to make in retirement, but we're preparing for retirement, the questions we need to ask. And in order to prepare, this is a checklist. This is something you need to work through. And don't wait till the day before you retire to ask these questions. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, online at retirementreformation.org. We invite you to check it out online, and we'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, every segment of every show, you always bring on a special guest that just shares a little bit of their heart of what God's got going on in their lives. Who do you have for us today?
I've got a special guest. Matter of fact, he was so kind. He's on vacation with his family. So he's joining us from that vacation spot. So John Decker, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join with us.
Thanks, Bruce and Jim. I enjoy being with you today.
That's very good. So let's just start with the basics. So give us a little bit of an executive history of John Decker and a little bit of the pathway that God has used to bring you to the point where you are now.
Yeah. Well, I think, everyone can relate to the first days they went to college. And, I grew up as a, kind of in a normal Rockwell situation, but not a believer. All things were good. But by the time I was in college, the Vietnam War was going on and a lot of things. In fact, I went to Woodstock, and a few weeks later, I was in college. So my start to college, I was going in as a pre-med major, but some of our RA led us to the wrong people on the first night, and the people that I met steered me in a path that really messed up my academic career. And it's really too bad. If someone had told me about Jesus, because I didn't know the gospel, I hadn't really heard what Jesus, who he is and what he has to do, that my life would have been changed entirely. But halfway through college, I did become a believer. And I remember the moment I received Christ, I thought, this is amazing. Nobody knows, you can live forever. You can know God. You're set free. You're forgiven. Nobody knows this. We got to start telling people, because no one in my circle knew that Jesus was alive. So we all told a lot of people. People came to Christ, and that was a great start. But when I noticed when we raised our own teenagers and they're going to a Christian school, none of them really had that same fire and automatic desire to reach out to others for Christ. It was just kind of live in the Christian bubble and be happy. So that was kind of what set things up, and then I can go on from there.
Yeah. So what was that career between college and the teenage years of your kids? What about that 15-year period? What did God have you doing, and how did he prepare you?
So I worked for Lockheed Martin, and I was in business development. We ended up having 3 kids. Now, fortunately, I've got 8 grandkids, which was great. But I was doing business development for around 17 years there, and I did another 10 years with Philips Broadband and fiber optics. But it was during that time that we noticed this dichotomy where the kids in our church, as I said, they didn't have that same automatic fire to bring someone to the Lord. But also, your listeners may remember the first days when they were on a college campus, or they remember their kids or even their grandkids. And what was it like? Those first days are a time that really sets you up for the people that you're going to walk with and be with. All the studies show that, and we experienced it. So my wife and I launched a InterVarsity fellowship at Syracuse University. And we noticed, the Christian kids were just hitting the scene. They planned to continue in the faith, but so many things happened, and the people that they met, it just drew them away, and it was such a shame. And we also noticed that the non-believers were so hungry for something new. So we said, how can we bring these two forces together, the lostness and the waywardness of the Christians when they hit college, but also the super incredible opportunity.
If I'm drawing out the threads of what I'm hearing you say, that there was a time with your own kids where you realized that was true. But now you're in your retirement years, for pity's sakes. How long ago did you retire, and what do you do? Why are you doing this now?
Well, I haven't actually retired because, who wants to stop serving the Lord? So for the last 12 years, I've been chasing this idea that how can we make it different in America and really help all these kids when they land on a campus and help them take this wonderful opportunity of leading others to faith. The harvest is plentiful, but the labor has been too few, and we're losing all these laborers. So I decided rather than retire and sit back, I wanted to do something. So now I've been part of one of the leadership and founding of a nonprofit called everystudent.org to make this happen. So that's been our exciting life now, and we're going to continue as long as we can.
So I hear a thread that started with your kids and it continues on through, and so that even during these retirement years, nothing is not appealing, and finding meaning and purpose. I sense a passion in you for this issue that God has planted for a long time. Can you describe that passion a little bit?
Yes. I think the passion really comes to the point when I was first a believer, and we saw that it was so easy, in a sense, to take that excitement and so on, to transfer it to someone else and see new people come to faith. And to us and all of our friends, that was life was all about. And the fact that the passion to instead of seeing students go off to a life that they walk away from faith, that there's this what we call the sweet spot, those first few weeks on the college campus. If students are connected and prepared, we've actually seen dorm revivals happen where one student shares with another and it becomes like an explosion. So, we want to change America. We need more laborers. But on a person to person, if you think about your own kids and grandkids and your own church and those around, by simply making this connection and having kids go to college with a team of friends they already know and be connected up with ministries that are there in advance so they land in college with a team and a mission, the outcomes are so tremendously different, and it's actually so simple to make it happen.
I got to just jump in here. John, you're a quote unquote retired age guy, but you're not retired.
Right.
And you're on a show speaking to retirees as we talk to them and encourage them to reform their idea behind retirement. Why? Why are you on this show? What do you have to say to this audience that you want to make sure we got to share today?
Yes. What I want to share is I want to see the kingdom of God grow. And I totally believe what the Retirement Reformation says, that this can be the most fruitful years of your life. And we have discovered this leverage point whereby just letting people know, let's say, like, what if retirees let their pastor know that every student cent exists? They could see a whole generation of students in their church be connected and thriving rather than falling away. It's essentially that simple.
But don't you have a purpose for retirees though as well? Don't you have a need for retirees to get involved with every student sent? Very
much so, because a lot of the way this grows is organically letting people in a given city know about this website and this program and this process. So a retiree can share with their church, they can share with other people in their city, and there's ways in just spreading the message, they can get an incredible amount done. But in addition to that, we need people that can then mentor students. Now, this could be mentoring high school students. It could be mentoring college students. It can be done personally with people that you know face to face. It can be done on Zoom. And we've got a whole, we'll share with you like a website where you can plug in and learn how to do this. We'll train any retirees who want to do it. It's a very fulfilling thing to see your church go from struggling and how these parents kind of losing their kids to really thriving and then getting personally connected with kids, not only in their faith formation, but how about their careers? What is it like to help a student find the right career? You've invested in a career, you being, say, a retiree that you've loved, you've enjoyed, and you have some real wisdom to pass on how you can serve Christ in that career and do it fruitfully and with a lot of joy. So what if we take all these people with experience and they can connect with these students and even parents,
right,
and share with them how to do this.
Right. John, I love what you're sharing. So not only do you have a need for retirees to help with word of mouth, but you really have a desire for retirees to get involved with your ministry at everystudentsent.org. Bruce, any final questions before we go?
No, just an observation that one of the roles that Retirement Reformation plays is to be able to discover ministries like yours, where virtually any senior, any adult can step in and play a role that's vital, where they can find meaning and purpose for themselves while they're bringing Jesus Christ to the next generation and finding meaning and purpose there. John, I'm glad that you're retired. Never change that definition.
Yes,
And we look forward, because at the Retirement Reformation, we say that we are called to be faithful for a lifetime, and you model that. We look forward to partnering with you and spreading the word about what God has called you to do, and hopefully bringing more to the ministry.
There's an easy way to get plugged in. You can go to everystudentsent.org. You can log in as a parent, and then you'll be able to, whether you're a parent or not, and you'll be able to find a block there under the engage menu for ambassadors and volunteering. And you'll be able to find, and maybe in the show notes, you'll have something too where they can plug in and learn just how they can volunteer. They can even get in touch with me. I'd be glad to talk with anyone.
Yeah, the show notes will definitely direct them to everystudentsent.org. John Decker, thank you so much for being on iRetire4Him today.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with more in our third segment as we talk about decisions and things that you need to decide about ahead of time, questions you need to ask during your retirement. You're listening to iRetire4Him. Hang on. Every iRetire4Him show goes so quickly we don't often get to remind you that there are two resources you should be checking out right now. I recommend that you get a copy of the Retirement Reformation book and the iRetire4Him book. Retirement Reformation focuses on the mindset and behavioral changes needed, let's just say paradigm shifting, that is needed to live out your faith in retirement. iRetire4Him is focused on many of the ways you can put your faith into action by investing your life into others in your retirement years. Get both at the Retirement Reformation website in the bookstore, retirementreformation.org. That's retirementreformation.org. Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce and I are talking today about the 6 choice questions you need to make, you need to answer before you get into retirement. The first one was, how are you going to relate to your spouse or partner? What are you going to do? And where are you going to do it? But Bruce, these are questions that are just the beginning of the choices we need to make. What's the next thing to decide?
Well, the next one is to answer the question of who are you going to do it with? What is your community going to look like? For example, you live in a community now, typically you may have a church community and so on. And those decisions that you make, you can either disrupt and set those all aside and find new ones with all of its issues, or you can have other ways to deal with the directions of your life, the geographical directions of your life, while you maintain a home office in your community. Remember 2 things. Number 1, wherever you go, you come along. You don't leave yourself behind. You don't leave your attitudes. You don't leave your habits. You don't leave any of that behind. You take it with you. And so many people think, well, I'm going to have a new start, so we're going to move someplace else with a new start. That new start has issues along with it. One of them is you, and the other one is your spouse. The third one is your relationships. And so who are you going to do it with, and what will your community look like? So one of the interesting things that we're learning these days, Jim, is that people are choosing places to move to who are compatible with their religious leanings and their political leanings, and much less to do with weather and other things. So those are cultural issues. So how important are those cultural issues to you? And if you have a culture that you really like where you are, man, don't go someplace else, because it's not going to work out for you. So all those questions about who are you going to do it with and what will your community look like are critical questions.
Community can mean so many things, but it's, and most of us can't handle having more than 1 or 2 or 3 really close friends. But to choose where you're going to be with those friends, you don't need to, I'm going to say this again, it's a beating a drum, because I've lived in Florida for 20 some years. You don't need to move to Florida to retire. It's nice to visit, but don't give up on all the lifelong relationships you have right where you're at. All right, some activities are free, Bruce. They don't cost anything, and some are not. How do we make sure how we spend our time doesn't blow our budget?
Yeah, so the really next question is, whatever those preliminary decisions or directions or the journey that you think you're going to take, the question then becomes how you're going to finance it. And are you doing something that is going to be more expensive or less expensive? That will require more assets or less assets. And there's things such as taxes, cost of living, cost of travel from where you're going to versus where you are at this point in time. And so how are you going to finance it is really critical. In a prior segment, we talked about, are you going to have enough? This is an even more basic question, just simply how are you going to finance it? What I've learned is that the financial decisions that you have to make during retirement are typically much more complex than the ones that you did before you were retired. And we can spend a whole session sometime talking about why that's true.
And don't plan on financing it with the interest you're making on your CD at your local bank. I mean, this is something that you need to know how that's really going to play out. Bruce, it seems like after we've asked all of these questions about choices and about how we're going to spend our time, there's only one question left to ask. What is it?
That last question, and it could be the first question, but I think if you ask it in this sequence as the last question of these is, what is most important to you? Because as you've gone down the rabbit trails or the key journeys or the key understandings of the prior questions, now you have a backdrop against which to sit back and you and your spouse and say, which of these decisions that we're making are really the most important to us? And if we had to do any adjusting, where would we adjust? Which one would we decide, I know that we'd really like to do that, but for these reasons, it really wouldn't be wise. And so to ask that final question, what is most important to you? And if it doesn't come out with something to do with God's plan for your life and your relationship with Him and your relationship with those, if it doesn't have something to do with relationships, then in fact, it's a good time perhaps revisit some of those earlier choices.
And those earlier questions, that's what we said in the first show in this series on the questions that we need to ask in prepping for retirement, is that a lot of these questions need to be revisited. It's not just a one and done. It's a one and redo, because life changes. Things come at us differently. We need to be able to be adjusting. Bruce, it's a phenomenal conversation. And, when you look, let's just get personal here as we close out the show today. You and Judy are in your 80s now. You've been in retirement age for 16 plus years. How many of these questions did you ask yourselves? And today you look back and you say, boy, I'm glad we asked that question ahead of time.
Yeah, I would say about half of them. And that I wish I'd had the wisdom in earlier years to be able to ask the rest of them, because they then evolved. But for example, the question of who are you going to do it with? So for example, when we look at those critical issues, how is our relationship with Brent going to be during retirement? Critical issue. We're going to be retired with him in one form or another. What is that going to look like? What about with our other children? What about with lifelong friends? What is that going to look like? And I think so often in our case that we focused on what are we going to do to the detriment of who are we going to do it with? And that if we had asked that question and examined it more intently, some of the other answers would have taken a different shape. Certainly would have changed some of our priorities. And so that relationship question with God, with our family, with those who are called to serve, those who are called to serve with, is the question. And I believe that was the question that ended up with the answer of Solomon in Ecclesiastes. That it's our relationship with God is number one. And then we fit in our relationships with others that go along with that. And then we figure out what it is that we're going to do.
Right. Because you don't take it with you. The only thing you take with you is your relationship with your Heavenly Father and the relationships with others that will join you in heaven. That was what Solomon came up to. I love that last line of Ecclesiastes, so depressing. And here's the conclusion of the teacher. Everything is meaningless except the pursuit of God. Bruce Bruinsma, great conversation on the choices, the questions about the choices we need to make in prepping for retirement. Fun conversation today. Thank you, Bruce.
Good to have the conversation.
You've been listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, of course, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. We're Christ followers journeying from just our everyday idea of retirement to the idea of a reformed retirement. In fact, a retirement reformation. So we can ultimately say together, I retire for him.
Retire for him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.